Y'all, listen. If there is one thing I've learned, adversity does not build character. Adversity reveals character. I'm Barbie Bassett, and I invite you to join me and my friends, Therese Apel and Traci Lee, as we peel back those adversity layers to see what else is revealed. Y'all, listen here. Welcome back. We know that we are a little bit late, but kind of sort of a little bit early with this particular podcast, but we're here nevertheless. I've got my good friend Therese Apel with Dark Horse Press here. Hey, Therese.
Hello, world. Hello,
Y'all,
Barbie.
Do you love her glasses?
I do feel like a nerdy eighth grader in these glasses. And part of that's because
it.
I was a nerdy eighth grader with glasses.
Well,
so when
so
I
was
look at the world
I,
through
but-
rims, it's like I feel like that kid again.
But you look so good in those.
They're incredible.
Thank
You're
you very
very
much.
Absolutely
incredible.
incredible.
I'd like to think that maybe there's a sexy smart girl thing going on here.
I think it is totally. I remember I've had glasses since I was in the 4th grade, and one of my sisters said, "Y'all, this is a really big throwback to an old commercials. Guys don't make passes to girls who wear glasses." And I was like, "Oh, you just wait."
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah. No.
Our producer, Daniel Anderson, here with Audio Alchemy Productions, is not agreeing with that old commercial.
I couldn't
right.
agree less.
Fair enough.
Not at
Yeah,
all.
Thank you.
Now,
Which
he's also in a very good mood today because
He
he
is.
has some good news also.
he does.
Yeah.
The podcast is growing,
That's right.
and Daniel's producing is growing. So we are thankful that he makes us look and sound good. So if you're one of those who is kind of sort of thinking, I might be ready to start talking myself, then he would be the one to make this happen for you. So thank you, Daniel, for doing that.
Thank you,
for
Daniel.
us.
Thank you, ladies, for being here.
Yes.
We are missing our third Charlie's angel, or Daniel's angels, excuse me.
you. Thank you.
And that is Traci Lee. She is missing from our threesome today, but that's okay. She'll be back again. You know, she is kind of sort of a boss at your U.S. country,
Yes, she
96.3. But sometimes even one of the bosses, can't get time off to do
Right.
this. So today's one of
Right.
these days. But maybe she'll be stalking us here
I hope so.
and she'll comment. You never know. Because I would love to hear her thoughts on today's topic.
Oh, yeah. So, Tracy, if you're listening, chime in.
Yes, please do. And we had actually thought about this for a previous podcast that we did, but today was just one of those days when this was the topic. And the topic is the idea that sometimes God gives us things in one season of our life because we're going to need them in another season of our life. Do y'all know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes.
Have you been there before?
I mean, when you think about it, so many times, because if we trust that our Creator is winding every step for us to meet His purpose,
Yes.
then you know that the things that He's walking you through are preparing you. And I think what's so cool is sometimes you're going through something in the middle of whatever you're going through, and you're thinking, God, why are you doing this to me?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out like a couple years later, or even a couple months later, you can turn around and be like, that's why.
Yeah.
That's what He's doing.
And that old saying about hindsight is 20/20, where you see things better on the other side of them every single time, even though you're still going to have questions. I mean, how many times have we gone through those moments in our life where we don't understand it at one moment, and then again, we may understand it later, but we're like, but God, really? Wasn't there another way that you could have gotten your point across
Right.
besides doing that?
Right.
And you just look at your life now as it is all played out in front of you. What are those moments? What are those seasons that you went through that now you know that you took something from that season because the Lord allowed you to go through that season that is helping you in the current season that you're in or in a future season? Is there something that comes to your mind, Therese, when you think about that in your own life?
Well, I think there are multiple ways that this goes, because sometimes it's God strengthening you for the next season.
Mhm.
Sometimes He's putting you through something so that you will be strong enough to handle whatever comes next. And sometimes He's teaching you for the next season. So, like, one of the things that I thought of is, for me, Well, we'll talk about that nerdy eighth grader.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Like, so I went through junior high and high school, and I've just always had a different personality. I've never been somebody that immediately fit into the cool crowd, you know? And so I struggled a lot in junior high and high school and never really quite found, I guess, a stride that was mine, you know? I excelled at a lot of things and I was good at a lot of things, but I was not good at having a lot of friends.
Okay.
So fast forward, you know, when I went to college, I made the decision that I'm going to have so many friends that I can't walk across the campus at Ole Miss without saying hi to everyone, you know, smiling at everyone, saying hi. And I accomplished that. But I think those two things in contrast taught me a lot about how to treat people and how to act toward people as an adult. Because, you know, it's like I can look back and lots of therapy. I had to learn
Yes.
to love that nerdy eighth grader.
Mhm.
And I had to learn to love that snobby college kid that suddenly was Miss Popular because she built it.
Yeah.
You know, and now I'm just somewhere in the middle and I really like that. But that was God walking me through these things so that I would have a compassion for people on both sides.
Mhm.
You know, you can look at somebody who's mean to people and you can say, well, that comes from a place of hurt. And you can look at somebody who's having people be mean to them and you can understand, you know, the struggle that they're going through too. So that's an easy answer. I think we're going to get into some of the harder ones as we go because as adults, the struggles are much different.
Oh, yeah. But I can definitely see where even just the small challenges that you would go through as a kid, which were big then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because when
It's your
you're a
whole
kid,
world.
I mean, everything is
Huge.
exaggerated. I think about growing up, I was overweight. I had glasses. I had braces, buck teeth. And so when people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd say, I want to be on TV giving the weather. And they,
Wow.
would just kind of like, you might want to have a conversation with Barbie because she thinks, and at the time, obviously, I looked nothing like that.
Yeah.
And because of that, I was bullied, made fun of. I remember coming home almost every day after school and crying to my mother because someone had made a comment about my weight or my glasses or my curly hair or whatever it was. And you're right, when you're a kid, those things are so important to you and you want to be accepted so bad.
Mhm.
But what that did for me is, in one way, prepared me for dealing with the public when I did move into those positions. So when I moved into television, it didn't make it any easier to hear the bullying comments and for people to, make fun of my hair or your eyes are big or you've got still big teeth or,
Mhm.
whatever it was. Or my goodness, when I was pregnant,
Yeah.
I was covering up the whole northern hemisphere, on the weather map.
Yeah.
It didn't make that any easier to deal with the public's comments, but I think because I had gone through that before as a child, and my mother taught me at such an early age, and I still hear it to this day, is when she would say, "Barbie, it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, it's what's on the inside that counts."
Yeah.
And I would still just replay that over and over and over in my mind, even as an adult. And I still do that to
Yeah.
this day, thinking, it doesn't matter what I look like here. Now,
Right.
am I going to show up looking my absolute worst? Probably
Try not
not.
to. Yeah.
Try not to do that. But that's just one little elementary example, if you will, of how something then
Mhm.
has helped me now,
Yeah.
you know? And then I go back to, I think, there was this one year that I sold memberships for the local Chamber of Commerce.
Mhm.
Never sold anything before in my life, but I was between television stations and I had what's called a non-compete, which means you've got to sit out for a certain time period before I could move to another television station. And the only job that I could find that was open, a friend actually gave it to me. She said, "I actually could use some help selling chamber memberships." Well, I have never sold anything in my life. And I was like, I don't know if I could do that, but I was willing to learn.
Mhm.
And I look at that year that I sold chamber memberships and all of the people that I learned through that process, all the business people that I got to meet. And that's, gosh, how long has that been? That's been like 27 years ago.
Yeah.
How that's helping me today.
Mhm.
That the Lord knew what I was doing then in the late 1990s is when that was, and the skills that I learned then was going to help me at another season
Sure.
of my life now in getting to do influencer videos that, if you follow my Facebook page right here, you can see me doing those and just really being a part of an advocate for businesses.
Mhm.
So isn't it funny how when we may think, I really don't like being at this stage in my life, or I don't like being at this point in my career, how it's always set up
Mhm.
for a come up.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I think of all things. So when I was in college, I just knew I was going to work for ESPN.
Yes, of
And I mean,
course.
that's absolutely what I was going to do. There was no question. Because also at Ole Miss, and you guys know this, if any of my old classmates or professors are out there, they kind of taught us like TV is like professional sports.
Mhm.
Like, it doesn't matter what your grades are as long as you're good.
Yes.
So, of course, I was the best.
Yes.
I mean, I was 19, 20 years old. I was the best.
Mhm.
And I firmly believe that. I had a great average in my major, but I just goofed off the rest of it. So we're doing all this stuff, and when I got to about my senior year, all of a sudden something came over me, and I was like, "This is so narcissistic. I cannot do this job. I do not want to do this." Every time I walk by a plate glass window, I'm checking my hair. Every time I look in the mirror, I'm like freaking out about what does my makeup look like. I can't do this. And so at 22, I have this whole career crisis. And I ended up like doing odd jobs for a while. And I worked at an answering service that, strangely enough, answered and dispatched the U.S. Marshals, the ATF, somebody else, I can't remember who all, after hours, as well as doctor's offices and whatnot. I became a substitute teacher at Oxford University School, and then ended up like teaching there for a little while, and then ended up going to Marshall Academy where I was a junior high teacher. I had, done several different kinds of jobs. So when I went back into journalism, it was funny because we'd be sitting in the Clarion Ledger, newsroom, and they'd say something. I'd be like, "Well, I used to work at a such and such, and this is the way that works." And they're like, "Therese, what haven't you done?" And I'm like, "Well, there was a time I was looking for what I was and who I was supposed
Yeah.
to be and what I
Yeah.
was doing and all." And the fact is, yeah, God walked me through all that. Yes, I've been a firefighter, a martial artist, a teacher, all kinds of things. But what that does is, in our business, you got to know a little bit about everything.
Yeah.
And you've got to know a little bit about every kind of person. You've got to be able to assimilate in any group. Because if there's one thing I learned being a crime reporter in this area, if I go to the streets of Jackson and I act a certain way, I'm going to get my butt kicked. If I go into the country club and act a certain way, I'm going to get kicked out.
Mhm.
So you've got to find a way to do all that. But it was the different things that happened in my life. I mean, it was some of my childhood. It was some of that search for myself where I put my hands in a little bit of everything that set me up to be in a position where when it came time to report, I knew people in so many of the different places I was looking. I got to know, law enforcement. That became, my specialty. But it really is funny how he gives us the tools as we go. When I was answering the phone, and funny enough, those lines you called for the movie thing in the time, I used to
Yes.
voice that.
Oh, how
So
funny.
yeah, I voiced those for a while in Oxford. But so while I was doing all that, I thought, gosh, I'm such a loser. Like, can I ever get a real job? Like doing this minimum wage thing in the middle of the night, whatever. But I learned so much about that.
Mhm.
I worked at a radio station during that time. My first journalism job after high school. I worked at an actual newspaper in high school, but then when I went to Ole Miss, my first job was at a radio station. So that set me up for what I'm doing now. I'm doing radio work now,
Right.
with Digio Strategies.
And how many years was that between then and today?
Okay, let me put it this way: the music that we're playing now, as like 30 years ago, blah blah blah, is the music I was playing back then.
Oh,
Like some of the exact
see?
same songs.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 30 years between when you were first doing radio work
Mhm.
and all the journeys and the valleys
Yep.
and the mountaintops, and then God brings you back to this. So the skills that he allowed you to learn then,
That you think are gone forever.
yeah,
You
that
think
you're
you've
now
used 'em
doing
up.
today.
Right.
That is amazing.
And I think it's not just about skills too, though. I mean, I think we have to. I was talking to somebody today about how, and he's a police officer. He was talking about how when he was younger, you'd go to, and I don't want to put too much business out there, but you'd go to a scene, a murder scene, or wreck scene, something like that. And his thing was, well, this dummy shouldn't have got himself in this position. Bag him up. Let's go to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had some trauma in his life. And all of a sudden, it's like, all of a sudden, I know what compassion feels like.
Yes.
And I know what empathy is. And I feel like so much of what you go through, it's not just about learning people and learning trades and whatever. It's God taking your spirit, your soul, that as a young person, you've got these hard and fast thoughts on what this means and what all these things are. And he takes that, and it's like he just pulls it apart one piece by one piece until one day you wake up and you find that you're a whole different person.
Yeah. It's almost like he works on you and changes your perspective. I mean, I'll be honest, whenever I would hear that someone had been fired before, I would think, oh, you must have done something really bad to get fired. I mean, who gets fired from that?
Mm-hmm.
And when it happens to you, you're kind of like, oh, there are two sides of the story. And typically the story that you're hearing
It's not the story.
is not the story. So I have found myself even having more sympathy
Mm-hmm.
for people when I find out they're going through that, something personally. And you could really fill in the blank with people who've gone through a divorce and you think, oh, yeah, you must have been the one who did something really wrong. And now knowing that they could be learning something through this process, or God could be using this horrible thing to bring them to a ministry a little bit later on
Yeah.
in their life. I mean, I look at you've lost both your parents over several years. I have not lost my parents yet. I know that day is coming for all of us. But I look at the ministry now that you have. So one day when I do call you and I say,
Mhm.
Therese, you're not going to believe what happened. You have been there before. You will understand that. And now because you have gone through that yourself, the people that you can love on and minister to now in your own life, and strangers, perfect strangers, the ministry of just your presence being there.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because sometimes he gives us those things, and before that, and I hate this, before my mom died, I would hear about somebody's parent that had died, and I'd be like, well, your parents are going to die.
Right.
It's like there is this feeling like, well, everybody's parents die. Like not I'm not sorry or I'm not hurting for you, but just there was just this feeling, and they're like, well, that's expected.
Yeah. That happens.
Yeah. But then when it actually happens to you, it becomes a whole different thing. And I think that was a perspective that I needed to have to be able to really reach people, because I have seen a lot of death.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you something, if your son is shot in the street, I can hold you and cry and understand what you're going through, because I have witnessed that more times than I can count. But if your parents die, up until 2018, I would have been like, oh, I'm so sorry. And it would have been a thought like, but these things happen.
Yeah.
And that sounds so callous, and I don't mean it as callous as it sounds. But I think if you haven't lost a parent, there is a little bit of that. And it's just inherent. It's, So that said, I think that each thing, it's sometimes hard to grasp. It's hard to see. But even talking to my friend Anthony Fox, who was in prison for
Right.
552 days, wrongfully convicted. And I remember we were talking at one point when he was in prison, and we were talking about whether he would be pardoned or whether his case would be overturned. And if he's pardoned, he loses his badge. If his case is overturned, it all goes away. And I said, well, what if you have to be pardoned? What happens then? And he said, well, then I guess I just find my ministry elsewhere. And the whole question was, what is your ministry past this point? So when you come to those places where you're like, God, I don't know what you're doing, but it's really not fair and it hurts, and you just want to scream at the sky, you have to stop and say, but what is the picture past this?
Yeah.
Because if you look to the Bible, we've talked about Joseph before. Tracy, if you're out there, I know that you don't like Joseph, but look at Joseph,
Yeah.
like all the things that he went through so that in the end he could save his brothers. You look at, across the board, you've got so many of these. When Daniel's in the lion's den, not our Daniel, but the biblical Daniel, Do you think while he was walking in there looking at these hungry lions, he was like, yeah, this is going to take me somewhere new? He was probably like, God, I sure hope I can trust you right now.
No, I think you bring up such a really good point, and wow, I just kind of want to put an exclamation point right here with what you said. Is that when you find yourself in that position of questioning or hurting, that instead of asking why, the question should be, what is my ministry that's going to come out of this, God? What are you setting me up for later on down the road?
Well, and I think that's an important question. But in the moment, when you're sitting there and you're having these questions in your head, you're Job. You're sitting there with all the boils. Your whole family's dead. Your friends are over here like, curse God and die, man.
Yeah.
The question is not just where does my ministry go from here, but what is my ministry now?
Yeah.
So his ministry that I always think of at that moment was, even if you don't change this, I'll worship you.
That's it.
And when you think about the things that, and Barbie, a lot of people look at us and they think we've got cool lives. They think that what we do, getting to be in the public eye, getting to see all the things we see, that somehow we're a little set apart, or our lives are easier, or we've got it all together, or all the things that you think about somebody who's a public figure. But I think that what makes you so real, and I know this, what makes you so real to people is the compassion that you show. And I know that comes from being the kid with the braces and the buck teeth. It comes from, growing up, going to school, and learning your way through it to be the person that you are now, as opposed to the person you could have been had you gone the other way and said, you know what, I'm bitter and angry. I got bullied my whole life. The reality, you're so real and you're so vulnerable and you're so accessible as a human. And that comes from the things that you went through and the traumas, and especially in this last season of your life. You've endured so much, but that's what makes you real. And that to me, God can't use us until, like the Velveteen Rabbit, until he's loved us so hard that our hair has fallen off and our eye buttons are gone and, all that stuff. He has to love us until we're real. But his love sometimes is hard, and it makes us lose our hair and our eye buttons.
That's so good. We're seeing your comments come through. May Martin said, experience changes your perspective. So true. Cindy Williamson says, what you do on day 41 is what really matters. And boy, that's good. And I think I'm going to go off. I'm going to take a sharp right turn.
Okay.
And since we have our man, our Daniel in the lion's den here with us, Daniel, you've had perspectives that you've gone through in the past. Is it okay if I ask you a similar question?
By all means, yeah.
Okay, so make sure that people see you on the camera too.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, so that way you
Gotta
can
set up the
see
shot.
what Daniel looks like.
Yeah, Daniel's got at least one podcast, right, Daniel, of your own?
Yes.
Or you have had one, yeah.
Yeah,
we've
but
got one.
Daniel, the Lord has given us all perspectives, and we've all had our own challenges over the years. What would you say one thing in your past that God allowed in your past in one season of your life that has helped you in another season? What would you say, Daniel?
For me, it's very, very simple. When I got sober, the wreckage that I caused in active addiction, it was very robust. It was awful. It was awful. I caused a lot of harm to those that are around me and those that even came near me. And then fast forward, I was blessed with the gift of desperation, and God took me by the hand and said, okay, I see you're willing. Let's get sober. And he helped me to get sober. Once I got sober and I kind of got a clear mind again after about a year, I was able to then tap into all of the negative crap that I went through in active addiction and turn all of those things into something that's profitable to me, because I can now help other people that are struggling, that have struggled or will struggle with the exact same things that I went through. So for me, the fundamental shift in my life was the day I got sober, April 11th of 2021.
Awesome.
Wow. So I wrote this down. Interesting that you say the word shift. I wrote this down earlier today. The goal of the season is to not shock you, but to shift you.
Yep.
And I don't know about you, but I'm going to shout while I'm shifting. So when we look at this difficult season that we may be going through in whatever way that is, the goal that the Lord has for you is not to shock you and make you think, oh my goodness, why in the world is this happening? But it's to shift you so that He can put you in a better place, in a better position for His glory.
Mhm.
It's almost like that would be just the simplicity of life and close the book on it. Okay, now you have it.
Right. Well, and the thing is, it is that simple.
Mhm.
It never feels that simple. Here on earth, it does not. But and I'm working on this. So when I say this, I'm not trying to pretend like I've got it all figured out, but when you're going through something, that perspective is everything.
Yes.
You know, to be able to say, what is this teaching me? What is my witness here? What will this become? And sometimes there's not a way to see it. You know, like obviously we'll use Anthony Fox again. He's sitting in prison and he's thinking, how does anything good come out of this? I mean, all of his friends, we all could look at him and say, there is something major coming out of this.
Mhm.
But we couldn't figure out how or when or why God was making him wait or anything like that. And I feel like there are times in our lives that we are, whether it's literal or not, we're sitting in that prison and we can't move and we can't move forward. And maybe it's emotional or maybe it's addiction or whatever like that. But to me, the part that's so important is in those times when God is building us, there's two ways to do it. And to be fair, neither of them are easy. You can either fight him or you can follow him,
Yes.
you know? And so I have gone through my life. We've talked about his big sledgehammer. I've gone through my life just being like, okay, well, I'm going to do it this way. And when God started to be like, hey, you listening? And I'm like, okay, in a minute.
Yeah.
And then he makes me listen. But finally, in this season of my life, I've started to learn. You know, and the best example is probably for me, it's my dating life. I finally in this season with the last dude figured out what toxic means, you know? And it's God just let me keep making that mistake over and over again until finally one day I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's what you've been saying. Every time you send me a red flag, every time you've sent me something that said, maybe that's not the guy. You think maybe you're making him more important than me? You think maybe you're letting him lie to you? You think maybe, you know, he's not what I have in mind for you. And I'd be like, but I like him, God. So could you hold on? Well, and that's just an example. He does that with us in so many places in our life when we cling to a job, we cling to a relationship, you know, a stage of life.
Right.
You know, for some people, it's hard to get old.
Yeah.
It's hard to age. So you cling to those youthful years when you got no business doing that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, but that's where it's, as you've said before, you know, keep doing what you're doing until God moves you.
Yes.
Or like my dad always said, just do the next right thing.
The next right thing. I'm looking at these comments. Jamie says, it is hard. And we are with you, Jamie. So
Mhm.
true. Deborah says it's been so hard for her working on a new life after her mother's death in December 2021. She's better, but she feels like she's not all good. And we can certainly relate to that too. You know,
Yeah.
one thing that I've learned, Therese, is our proximity to the Lord, our proximity to the Father has everything to do with what we hear.
Yeah.
So you can't hear someone whisper if you're two worlds apart or if one is on one side of the room and one is on the other side of the room. You have to get close to someone to hear them whisper. And so many times we look for the answer, we look for God, we look for direction, we look for guidance in this big booming voice like, God, just what you were saying, knock me over the head, you
Yeah.
know, tell me what I need to do. That's how we're asking him to speak to us. When we saw many times in the Bible, he is just a whisper.
Yeah.
And so you got to get close to him to hear the whisper and in what he is wanting to refine in us, what he's wanting to show us, what he's wanting to teach us, how he is wanting to shift us. Is while we're sitting here waiting on this big booming voice to answer, our proximity to him will determine what we hear. You're looking up something, I can tell.
Yes. So when you said that about the whisper, one of my favorite verses because it's what it feels like. So, and this is the King James version, so I'm probably going to stumble over it because I don't usually read King James, but 1 Kings 19:11 through 12, roughly. And he said, "Go forth and stand up on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and broke into pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind.
Nope.
And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake.
Nope.
And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire.
Nope.
And after the fire, a still small voice."
Yeah.
And that's so powerful. It makes me cry every time. It's like the things that happen, we're looking for God in the big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it means so much that he's there, just right there in our ear, if we will listen, if we're not distracted by the wind and the earthquake and the fire. And life feels like that. I mean, that's
Those are the things that get our attention, though, Therese. The wind, the earthquake, the fire, those are the things that distract us. And because they're big and they hurt and they're uncomfortable, those are the things that take our attention away from the whisper.
but can we go back to our favorite guy, Job?
Yes, absolutely.
The earthquake losing all his family, the fire losing all his livestock, the
storm.
wind,
Yeah.
the wind losing everything he owns. He's got boils, he's got all that. But you know what? He was listening to the whisper.
Yeah.
And he even had his friends in his face being like, "Don't listen to that.
Uh-huh.
Look here, die." And he kept listening and he kept trusting God. And that's the part that I wish that I could do better. Because I can talk about it all day right now. Like, I've got some sadness and I've got some things going on, but there's nothing right now that is making me panic and making me worry, and my life is coming to an end and they're tearing me up on Facebook or whatever.
Right.
When that's going on, what I want and what I ask God for daily is give me the presence of mind and give me the desperation for you, that when all that's going on, the only place I'm looking is to you. And it makes me think, and I'm a dog person, but when you look up and your dog is staring at you across the room, and you've got no idea why, it's just that's what's happening. I want to do that to God.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be where I am focused on him. If he moves, if he gets up to go to the bathroom, I want to follow him. I mean,
Yeah.
just like, I feel like when we talk about how dogs are supposed to show us real love, I think that's what it is. Because if you draw it like that, I want to be so stuck on God that when the wind and the earthquake and the fire comes, I'm looking at him to say, where are we going next?
Yep. Doesn't even rattle you.
Yeah.
Does not even rattle you. And that's hard to do because those things make the most noise.
Oh, yeah.
And anything in our life that makes more noise than him, it can be an idol.
Oh, absolutely.
And when we start listening to what the people are saying or listening to the news and all the bad news going along, and when something bad happens in our life, the first person that we run to is our friends instead of running to him. I was looking at Luke 11:28. It says, Jesus said, so he's saying this himself, "Blessed are those who hear the word of God and keep it." And then John 8:47 says, "Whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God." So to me, that's pretty simple. It's basically a mandate from heaven to listen and to respond to every word that God says, every whisper that he says, whether that word is truly the word, the Bible, his words, or whether it is the whisper.
Yeah.
If you're not hearing the whisper, then you got to check your proximity to him. We've got to take a moment and thank the people who make this podcast possible, because we're seeing all of your comments, and thank you.
And we love that. Thank you.
I mean, y'all just typing your words, your comments, your own feelings, it lets us know that we're not alone in having these questions. But one of the people who's helping make this podcast, y'all listen here, possible for us is Regenerate Technologies. It's your all-in-one local IT solutions provider. If you're looking for reliable IT services, Regenerate Technologies has got you covered. They are local. They are a one-stop technology partner. And here's what all they offer. You ready for this? They offer high-speed internet. They offer phone services. They offer security solutions. They will actually host your web services and your email services. They offer wireless and they offer professional cabling. They serve a variety of businesses, including medical clinics and restaurants and law offices. I mean, you name it, they can keep you connected and secure. That's a big word that we need to have these days and times in IT. So they want to simplify your technology needs. Call Regenerate Technologies today, 601 871 0008, or you can go to their website, which is www.regener and then the number 8.com, because technology should work for you instead of you working for technology. Let technology work for you. So thank you, Regenerate Technologies, for being a sponsor of the Y'all Listen Here.
Yes.
I am thinking about some of the people that you were talking about earlier, Therese,
Mhm.
who had a season here in their life, and then God brought them to another season. And based on what they went through in that previous season, determined the ultimate setup. One of those being Joseph,
Yeah.
Tracy's favorite person.
Right. Where you at, Tracy?
If it weren't for the prison, there would be no palace.
Mhm.
I think about Moses. If it were not for the Pharaoh, there would not have been a promised land.
That's right.
I think about Jesus. If there weren't a manger, there would not have been a mount called Calvary.
That's right.
I think about myself. If I were not fired, I would not have a fortune and future.
Right.
Don't get me started preaching today.
Hey now, hey
Don't
now.
make me preach
Let's
today.
go.
That's right.
So I'm thinking about all of these moments that we can go back in the Word of God, and we can see over and over what one season was. God turned it into a totally different season.
Right.
Doesn't mean it was easy, doesn't mean that it was enjoyable,
Mhm.
but it was always a purpose there,
Right.
so God could use them for his glory on the other side. And some of those took years. I mean, you think about Moses and the children of Israel, 40 years going around the same mountain. I think I could have figured out a way, a back door.
It was an 11-day trip. I mean, it should have only taken
Yeah.
11 days.
So you look through the Bible, there are some of these people who, from one season to the next, it did take years. And then you see somewhere, it probably didn't take as long. Jesus is a great example, 33 years
Mhm.
between birth to death. So we see it over and over and over in Scripture. Why would we think he would do anything less
Yeah.
for his children?
So I tell you why. It's because we listen to the fear.
Yes.
Because we let the serpent come in and convince us of things that aren't real. So you think about the fact that there are so many times that we're like, I know I should trust God, but, or you say, I'm trusting God, but I don't understand, whatever. All the different pieces that we throw out there about why it's okay that we're having this panic attack while all this stuff is going on, when really that's the moment you are secure in God's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear, I mean, there's the song Fear is a Liar, which I
Right.
love, but it's also an idol. Like when you choose to listen to the fear instead of God's voice, instead of searching for the whisper, you're listening to the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when basically what you're doing is you're putting fear above God. Well, whatever I'm afraid of is stronger than him. That's why it has all my attention. And he's just over there just waiting for you to chill out for a minute and be like, okay, God, wait a minute. You're the guy that drives this thing. And if you stop and you look at things from a big picture perspective, which most of us don't do on a daily basis. Mostly it's like, dang, why did I get a flat tire on the way to the grocery store? Well, maybe there was a big wreck that you missed because you were on the side of the road.
Yeah.
We don't think in those terms. We think, dang, I got a flat tire. God is so big and he loves us so much and he has planned so much. And, we laugh about the Presbyterians and predestination and whatever. And it's not worth really getting into that. But the fact is, he knows the plans he has for us. And we have to know that that creator that planned whatever he planned in whatever way he planned it and loves us so much he sent his son. Why is fear more important than that?
Mhm. So true. I wrote this down, that we're in a separation season. That if you want to fulfill everything that God has called you to do, we have got to listen intently to that whisper
Yeah.
and to obey quickly whenever He speaks. So when He is showing us what we need to do, stop paying attention to the earthquake and to the wind and to the fire, but listening to Him. So, what are your parting thoughts for today for anybody listening to this podcast? And they've gone from season to season to season.
I feel like it is important to remember that in each season that we go through, we are being steered through it and walked through it. I mean, if you want to be super cliche, it's the footprints in the sand. We're being walked through it by a loving God who not only sent his son for us to save us so that we don't have to spend the rest of our lives away from him or the rest of eternity away from him, but how real that is. And if you're in one of those places where you feel like this is the worst it's ever been, that's where you get to know him the best if you will stop and put your eyes on him and listen for the whisper.
That's so good. I would leave you with this, and I mean, you made your point so well today, listening. But ask the Lord to remind you or to show you what you have learned before in a previous season, so that you can take that and use that in the next chapter or the next season in your life. And that's really what we want to end this current podcast with and encourage you with. Something else that we have started is a Patreon account. If you don't know anything about Patreon, it's kind of an opportunity for us to have a conversation after the podcast where we do a little bit more of a deep dive into a topic. So if you would like to hear what we're about to talk about off this podcast, kind of in the same general discussion, you can subscribe to our Patreon. And our Patreon is called Y'all Listen Here. Isn't that right, Daniel?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. You can go to Patreon. You can look up Y'all Listen Here. You will see us there, and you can be a part of that after the podcast conversation.
We'll post the link right after this is done.
Oh, perfect. They're going to post the link right after this is over with, so that way you can go to the Patreon account and you can subscribe and listen to more of that, especially if you have enjoyed this conversation today. And we have certainly enjoyed having you with us today. We've seen all of your comments, and this is always so good and inspiring for us to see. And we want to invite you to the next episode of Y'all Listen Here.
Bye, y'all, for a minute.
It's a brand new day.